Do you know who the richest person in the world is? You're probably thinking of Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, or Bill Gates, right? I mean, sure, those guys are all rich, but they're not even close to some of the richest people back in medieval ages. Today, we're going to discuss 3 extremely wealthy individuals who could be considered the world's richest during their times. In this video, we're going to try and estimate their wealth, how they got their wealth, and how they used their wealth to build a lasting legacy, and what ended up happening to all that money. So, let's get started. Okay, the first on our list is the legendary African ruler Mansa Musa. He was the emperor of the Malian Empire at its height and ushered in a golden age in West Africa. Most estimates put his net worth around $400 billion in today's value. And he's most well known for his pilgrimage to Mecca, the holiest city in the Islamic world. And this is important because along with him came an impressive caravan. It consisted of 60,000 men, which included enslaved persons, all clad in brocade and Persian silk, very luxurious fabrics. His baggage train consisted of 80 camels, each carrying 300 pounds of gold. So the question is, how on earth did he amass such an immense fortune? Well, it had a lot to do with the central location of his empire. And under his rule, Timbuktu, which is an ancient city in Mali, became the most important commercial hub. This allowed him to be the middleman in the trade of various precious goods, which included gold, ivory, salt, and even enslaved persons. In fact, the use of slaves might even explain why he got so insanely wealthy. With freemen or even peasants, there's only so much a ruler can do to seize from them. With slaves, however, anything their labor produces entirely belongs to the master. His conquests allowed him to access vast salt and gold deposits in the south of his empire, and the many slaves that he acquired in his campaigns were then put to use in these mines. So that gives us an idea of how Mansa Musa got his wealth. Now, how did he use this wealth? He was noted by his contemporaries to be extremely generous with his wealth. For example, during his pilgrimage, he was said to have spent so much gold in charity that it actually caused inflation in the Mamluk Empire. This, by the way, was one of the richest Muslim states in the medieval world. Mansa also spent lavishly on the development of his empire. He built public buildings, mosques, all for the benefit of his subjects. He also expanded road networks that would facilitate trade and make his realm even more prosperous. And of course, he invited scholars and brought books from abroad to help foster higher learning. Because of all of this, Timbuktu actually ended up becoming a major Islamic university center as well. After Mansa's death, he left his descendants immense wealth and a flourishing empire. However, they would be unable to keep this realm united. Rebellions would occur, breaking up the empire, damaging trade links, and ending this golden age. Now, while West Africa was in their golden age, Europe was having a pretty dark time. This was because it was plagued by a deadly pandemic and various wars. By the way, I made a video about Europe's medical catastrophe and the Black Death, so check it out over here if you haven't already. So after all of this, when things began to recover, Europe experienced explosive growth. Markets were expanding rapidly, driven by innovation, transport, finance, and agriculture. And one of the individuals who benefited the most from this was Jakob Fugger. Jakob was not from nobility. He was the humble son of a cloth merchant. Now, his parents wanted him to become a priest, but he had a keen interest in finance. His venture into the business world would make him immensely rich, that's for sure. But he also completely redefined the economic and political landscape of Europe. He used his wealth to help the crown, and he wasn't shy about reminding the king about his contributions. He was bold enough to tell a king that without his help and finances, the king wouldn't even be where he is. It's pretty gutsy in my opinion. Now, adjusted for inflation, his net worth is estimated to be around $400 billion. To acquire such a vast amount of wealth, Jakob used his financial knowledge to a great advantage. He would particularly target high-risk rulers and nobles and then grant them loans. And in return, he would ask them for concessions that provided returns that greatly exceeded the amount of money that he gave them in the first place. He would then use this money to buy up mines and set up trade companies and hire experts to run them. And the profits generated from them would then be used to give out more loans and get yet more concessions. And the cycle would continue, and he would continue to become richer and richer. But that wasn't enough. Jakob wanted even more. He used his money to appoint kings and back popes in Europe. He would fund their wars, and in return, he would get more concessions, especially related to mining rights. Jakob was also always in search of new trade opportunities. There are also some sources who say that Jakob was the one who most likely funded Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe. He was also an active lobbyist who would notably convince the Pope to legalize interest. Now, while he was money hungry, there's also some research that shows he tried to look after his fellow citizens and look after their welfare. He funded hospitals, charity projects, including the world's first social housing complex, which still operates to this day. So what happened to all this wealth? Fugger's vast wealth would be preserved by his successor, his nephew, Anton Fugger. He would actually go on to more than double the worth of his uncle's company. However, his descendants, the ones after him, they showed very little interest in the business. They were high-ranking nobles, and they were more interested in leisurely and courtly activities rather than doing anything for the business. So without the strong leadership of anyone from the family, their company would greatly be impacted by the devastating 30-year war. And soon their business was dissolved. Okay, let's move on. So far, we talked about two individuals famous for their insane amount of wealth. Now, we're going to talk about Shen Wannan. Not only was he rich, he was honored as a living god of fortune by many in China. Now, Shen came from a very humble background. He was a beggar in medieval China, back when it was ruled by the Mongols, and his best friend was another beggar named Zhu Yuansang, who would end up being the future emperor of China. Through suffering from poverty, both of these men would become very ambitious. While Zhu's goals were more political, Shen's eyes were on business and commerce. The period that Shen lived in was marked by chaos due to rising rebellion against the Mongol rule. And as they say, where there is chaos, there is opportunity. Taking advantage of this, he laid claim to the lands of many people who had died or fled. This included that of the influential family, the Lu clan. Now, using the proceeds from this land, he began to build up his trade empire. Shen started exporting silk, tea, and ceramics overseas, which ended up becoming very successful. Shen also took advantage of where he was based. He built up this marine business by taking advantage of the geographical location that enabled him to reach overseas markets very efficiently. He quickly established himself as the leading merchant in the trade of luxury goods such as silk, tea, and ceramics. When peace was restored to the empire under the Emperor Zhu, commercial activity increased, and his wealth skyrocketed. Shen's wealth was massive, and it rivaled that of the state. The Great Wall that you see in today's current form could only have been made possible with the money that Shen donated. Now, having said all of this, there actually isn't any scholarly estimate of his wealth. However, it was enough that he, without hesitation, agreed to help the emperor pay for the new capital and the fortification of the Great Wall. This just gives you an idea of how immensely rich he was. However, in the end, Shen became a victim of his own success. His wealth rivaled that of the entire Chinese state, and this would incur the envy of the emperor, who was his friend. He and his family would be exiled and their vast fortune would be confiscated. So a pretty sad ending to someone who had such an immense amount of wealth from such humble beginnings. Learning about the life accounts of all these three individuals, you might have noticed a common thread. These three individuals built their wealth primarily through trading. Another thing that was pretty common was that they weren't shy of their generosity. Now, this doesn't really match up with today's ultra-wealthy. I'm not talking about all billionaires, but most of them are what we call the selfish rich, which, to be honest, is quite a modern thing. Now, we'll have to wait and see how the history books will remember today's ultra-wealthy versus the ones in medieval times. In this video, I mentioned the Black Death in Europe and how it devastated the continent. But did you know that out of the Black Death came many great outcomes? I made a video explaining the Black Death and its consequences in Europe. So check it out over here if you haven't already, and I'll see you soon.